He stood between an alien child and the explosion, then woke to see the entire army kneeling. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The metallic corridors of the Vexorian warship hummed with the low vibration of failing systems, sparks cascading from ruptured conduits as chaos spread through every level. Ethan Cole, a maintenance technician assigned to the diplomatic exchange vessel, stumbled through the smoke-filled passageways, his yellow safety vest now torn and blackened with soot. What should have been a routine repair assignment had become a nightmare when extremist factions from both human and Vexorian forces decided to sabotage the fragile peace talks. The Vexorians were an ancient warrior race, their empire spanning 12 star systems with a military tradition that stretched back millennia. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with broad shoulders covered in iridescent scales that shifted from deep purple to midnight blue depending on their emotional state. Their faces were angular and severe, with large golden eyes that could see across multiple spectrums of light. For generations, they had been the unchallenged power in this sector of space until humanity arrived with their faster-than-light drives and their stubborn refusal to accept Vexorian dominance. The resulting Cold War had lasted 15 years, punctuated by skirmishes and diplomatic standoffs, until finally both sides agreed to meet aboard this neutral vessel to discuss terms of cooperation. Ethan had never wanted to be part of history. He was just a mechanic, good with his hands and better with machines than people. When the diplomatic corps put out the call for technical personnel to support the peace summit, he had volunteered mainly because the pay was triple his normal rate, and he could send more money home to his sister and her kids. Now he was choking on acrid smoke, his toolkit scattered somewhere 3 decks below, wondering if he would ever see Earth again. The explosion that started everything had originated in the engineering section, deliberately set to cascade through the ship's power grid. Emergency bulkheads had slammed down across multiple sections, trapping personnel in isolated pockets throughout the vessel. Ethan had been working on a recalcitrant air circulation system when the blast hit, throwing him against a wall and filling his ears with the screaming alarm klaxons. When he regained his senses, he found himself cut off from the main evacuation routes, with fires spreading through the maintenance corridors and the ship's artificial gravity fluctuating wildly. He moved carefully through the debris, his breathing labored in the thickening smoke. The emergency lighting cast everything in a hellish red glow. Somewhere ahead, he could hear the distinctive sound of Vexorian battle armor, the heavy footfalls of soldiers moving through the chaos. He pressed himself against the wall, uncertain if they were friendly forces or part of the extremist faction that had triggered this disaster. The armor passed by without detecting him, and he waited until the sound faded before continuing. Then he heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold. A child crying. Ethan froze, listening intently. The sound came from somewhere ahead, down a side passage that led toward the diplomatic quarters. He knew that several Vexorian families had been brought aboard for the summit, a gesture meant to demonstrate trust and commitment to peace. The presence of civilians, especially children, was supposed to make both sides more careful, more invested in making the negotiations work. Now those same families were trapped in a burning ship. The crying grew louder as he approached, and he could hear the terror in those small sounds. Every instinct told him to find an escape pod, to get off this dying ship while he still could. But his feet kept moving forward, drawn by that sound of fear and helplessness. He rounded a corner and stopped short. A Vexorian child sat huddled against the wall, probably no more than 6 years old by human standards. Her scales were a lighter shade of purple than the adults, almost lavender in the emergency lighting. She wore a small ceremonial robe that was now torn and stained with ash. Her golden eyes were wide with terror, tears streaming down her angular face. Behind her, the corridor ended in a sealed emergency bulkhead, and to her left, a fire raged where a power conduit had ruptured completely. Then Ethan saw what had made his blood cold. Wedged against the bulkhead, sparking and hissing with barely contained energy, was a plasma charge. He recognized it immediately from his technical training. It was military grade, probably placed by the saboteurs to ensure maximum damage to this section. The casing was cracked, its safety protocols compromised. The charge was going to explode, and soon. When it did, it would vaporize everything within 30 meters and cause a hull breach that would vent this entire section to space. The child saw him and made a small sound of fear, pressing herself further against the wall. To her, Ethan was one of the aliens, one of the humans that her people had been taught to fear and distrust. He held up his hands slowly, making himself as non-threatening as possible. He called out to her, keeping his voice calm and soft despite the fear hammering in his chest. "I am not going to hurt you. I am here to help." The child did not respond, could not respond. She probably did not speak any human languages, but she watched him with those enormous golden eyes as he moved slowly closer. The plasma charge gave a sharp crack, and a new shower of sparks erupted from its damaged casing. Ethan estimated he had maybe 2 minutes before it blew, possibly less. He needed to get the child to safety, but the fire blocked the only other corridor, and the bulkhead behind her was sealed tight. There were no other exits, no convenient ventilation shafts or access panels. He moved to the bulkhead and tried the manual override, but the mechanism was fused, probably damaged by the explosion that had sealed it. They were trapped, and the clock was counting down. The charge crackled again, louder this time. The child whimpered and pulled her knees up to her chest. Ethan looked at her, then at the charge, then back at her. His mind raced through calculations, angles, blast radius. If the charge exploded, the force would expand outward in all directions. The bulkhead would contain some of it, reflecting the blast back into the corridor. The fire would channel it forward. The child was sitting almost directly in the path of maximum destructive force. But if something were between her and the blast, something to absorb and deflect that initial wave of superheated plasma, she might survive. The bulkhead behind her might hold long enough for rescue teams to cut through. It was not much of a chance, barely a chance at all, but it was something. Ethan had never thought of himself as particularly brave. He had never been in the military, never fought in any of the border skirmishes between humans and Vexorians. He fixed air conditioning units and repaired hull seals. He liked old movies and spicy food and video games. He had a sister who needed him, nephews who called him Uncle E and asked him to show them pictures of spaceships. He had every reason to try to save himself, to run and hope the blast would not catch him. But he looked at that terrified child, alone and abandoned in this burning metal tomb, and he knew he could not leave her. Could not even try. He moved quickly then, before fear or common sense could stop him. He crossed the distance to the child in 3 long strides. She shrank back, making a small sound of alarm. He turned his back to the plasma charge and dropped to his knees in front of her, spreading his arms wide. His body was not much of a shield, but it was all he had. He glanced back over his shoulder at the charge. The sparks had turned from orange to white-hot blue. Any second now. Ethan turned back to the child and tried to smile, though he was not sure how it looked. He wished he could say something comforting, something that would make her less afraid. But there was no time and no shared language. So he just stayed there, on his knees with his arms spread wide, a human barrier between her and death. The child stared at him, confusion replacing some of the fear in her golden eyes. She did not understand what he was doing, why this alien creature had placed itself between her and danger. The plasma charge reached critical instability with a sound like tearing metal and exploding stars. The blast wave hit Ethan with the force of a freight train moving at light speed. Heat beyond measure washed over him, through him. He felt his skin burning, his lungs searing. The explosion picked him up and slammed him backward, and everything became pain and fire and brilliant white light. Somewhere in that moment of agony, he had a strange clarity of thought. He hoped his sister would understand. He hoped the child would live. He hoped it had meant something. Then there was only darkness. When consciousness returned, it came slowly and reluctantly, dragging Ethan up from a comfortable nothingness. The first thing he became aware of was pain, a deep aching throb that seemed to permeate every cell of his body. The second was that he was breathing, which seemed improbable given his last memories. The third was sound, a low rhythmic vibration that he eventually recognized as voices chanting in unison. Ethan tried to open his eyes and found his eyelids impossibly heavy. When he finally managed to force them open, the light made him wince. He blinked several times, trying to focus. He was lying on his back, staring up at a curved ceiling that glowed with soft bioluminescent panels. This was not the burning corridor. This was not the dying ship. This was a medical facility, clean and quiet and alive with monitoring equipment. He turned his head slowly, fighting waves of dizziness. The movement caused whatever pain medication they had him on to surge through his system, and the throbbing in his body receded to a manageable level. He was in a large medical ward, and he was not alone. Along the walls, he could see other beds with other patients, both human and Vexorian. Medical personnel moved quietly between them, checking monitors and adjusting treatments. But that was not what made him stare in confusion. Standing in neat ranks filling the center of the ward were Vexorian soldiers, dozens of them in full ceremonial armor. Their scales shone with rainbow iridescence in the soft light. They stood perfectly still, perfectly silent except for that low rhythmic chanting he had heard. And they were all on one knee, heads bowed, facing his bed. Ethan tried to sit up, but a gentle hand pressed him back down. A human doctor appeared in his field of vision, a woman with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She smiled down at him with relief. "Mr. Cole," she said softly, her voice filled with warmth. "Welcome back. You have been unconscious for 3 days. Please do not try to move too quickly. You have extensive injuries, though you will make a full recovery." Ethan's throat was dry, his voice coming out as a rasp. "The child, the little girl, is she?" The doctor's smile grew wider. "She is alive and completely unharmed. You shielded her from the blast with your own body. She did not receive so much as a scratch. You absorbed the entire impact." The relief that flooded through Ethan was so intense it made him dizzy. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting that knowledge wash over him. She was alive. He had not died for nothing. When he opened his eyes again, the Vexorian soldiers were still there, still kneeling, still chanting. "Why are they doing that?" he asked. "The soldiers. Why are they kneeling?" The doctor glanced over at the assembled warriors, and something like awe crossed her face. "They are performing the ritual of gratitude, an ancient Vexorian ceremony reserved for the highest acts of honor and sacrifice. They have been taking shifts doing this since you were brought aboard. When one group finishes their hour, another arrives to take their place. They have not stopped for 3 days." "That makes no sense," Ethan said. "I am nobody. I am just a mechanic. I am not even military." The doctor shook her head slowly. "Mr. Cole, do you understand what you did? In Vexorian culture, children are sacred. They are protected above all else. The deliberate targeting of a child is considered the most heinous of crimes, punishable by the complete destruction of the offender's entire bloodline. But the willingness to sacrifice one's own life to save a child, especially a child not of your own species, that is considered the highest possible demonstration of honor. You did not just save that little girl. You demonstrated a moral courage that the Vexorian people thought humans incapable of possessing." Ethan did not know what to say to that. He looked at the kneeling soldiers, at their bowed heads and their rainbow scales. "You said the ship was dying. How did we survive? How did anyone get out?" "The ship did not survive," the doctor replied. "The explosion you shielded the child from triggered a cascade failure. The vessel broke apart approximately 7 minutes after the blast. But emergency crews managed to reach your section and cut through the bulkhead. They found you unconscious and the child crying but alive, still sheltered beneath your body. Both human and Vexorian teams worked together to evacuate everyone they could reach. The final count was 73 survivors out of 147 aboard. It could have been far worse." Ethan absorbed this information slowly. "What about the peace talks? The summit?" The doctor's expression grew serious. "The sabotage was the work of extremist factions on both sides, groups that wanted the war to continue. But your actions, Mr. Cole, have had consequences they did not anticipate. When the Vexorian people learned that a human civilian had sacrificed himself to save one of their children, it changed something fundamental. The Warhawks on their side lost all credibility. How could they claim humans were monsters when one had died saving their innocent? And on our side, when people saw the Vexorian rescue teams working side by side with human crews, risking their own lives to save everyone aboard, it became much harder to maintain the hatred." She paused, and a small smile played at her lips. "The peace talks did not just resume, Mr. Cole. They succeeded. 3 days ago, while you were unconscious, Both governments signed a comprehensive peace treaty. The war is over. And it is over largely because you showed both sides that the other was capable of honor, of sacrifice, of caring for life beyond their own species. Ethan stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. He had just been trying to save a scared kid. He had not been thinking about politics or peace treaties or the grand arc of history. He had just done what any decent person would do when confronted with a helpless child in danger. The idea that this simple act had somehow ended a 15-year Cold War seemed impossible, absurd. "I did not do anything special," he said quietly. "Anyone would have done the same." The doctor shook her head firmly. "No, Mr. Cole. Most people like to think they would, but when faced with certain death, instinct takes over. Self-preservation is the most powerful drive in any living being. You overrode that instinct. You chose death over watching a child die. That is rare, regardless of species." Movement near the entrance to the ward caught Ethan's attention. The rows of kneeling soldiers parted smoothly, creating a corridor down the center. Through that corridor walked a Vexorian who stood even taller than the others, his ceremonial armor more elaborate, his scales a deep royal purple shot through with veins of silver. He moved with the assured grace of someone accustomed to command, but his face held an expression of profound emotion. Behind him walked a smaller figure, a Vexorian child in a fresh ceremonial robe of white and gold. She held the tall Vexorian's hand tightly, but her golden eyes were fixed on Ethan with an intensity that made his breath catch. It was her, the girl from the corridor. She was alive and whole and looking at him like he hung the stars. The tall Vexorian approached Ethan's bed and then, with slow deliberation, lowered himself to one knee. The entire ward seemed to hold its breath. When he spoke, his voice was deep and resonant, but Ethan could hear the emotion threading through it. "Ethan Cole," he said, and Ethan noticed his English was flawless though heavily accented. "I am Carvex, Supreme Commander of the Vexorian Military Fleet and Council Member of the High Command. I am also the father of this child, this precious spark of life that you saved at the cost of your own." The child, his daughter, stepped forward and dropped to her knees beside her father. She spoke in her own language, a flowing melodic sound that reminded Ethan of water over stones. Her father translated quietly. "She says she was so frightened, alone in the dark with the fire and the danger all around. She says she thought she was going to die, that her life was ending before it truly began. Then you came," she says, "a human who she had been taught to fear. But you did not harm her. You put yourself between her and death. She says she will never forget your face in that last moment before the explosion, how you tried to smile at her even though you were terrified. She says you gave her your life so she could keep hers." Carvex's voice broke slightly on the last words. He paused, collecting himself, then continued. "In our culture, there is a concept called the life debt. When one person saves another's life through personal sacrifice, a sacred bond is formed that transcends normal social relationships. But what you did goes beyond even that ancient tradition. You had no obligation to my daughter. She was not your responsibility, not your concern. You could have fled, should have fled, and no one would have judged you. But you stayed. You chose her life over yours." He reached out with one massive hand and gently took Ethan's much smaller hand in his. The scales felt smooth and cool against Ethan's skin. Carvex said, his voice thick with emotion, "I have spent 40 years as a warrior. I have commanded fleets in battle. I have faced death and dealt death. I have seen courage in many forms. But I have never, in all those years, witnessed an act of purer heroism than what you did in that burning corridor. You were unarmed, untrained in combat, facing certain death. And you did not hesitate. You did not calculate odds or weigh your chances. You simply acted because it was right." The Supreme Commander rose to his feet, still holding Ethan's hand, and his voice rang out clearly through the ward. "By the ancient laws of our people and the authority vested in me by the High Command, I declare Ethan Cole to be a guardian of the light, the first human ever to receive this honor. He is to be accorded all rights and privileges of the highest Vexorian nobility. His name will be inscribed in the Hall of Eternal Heroes on our homeworld, and his actions this day will be taught to our children and our children's children, so that they may know the true meaning of courage." The assembled soldiers rose as one and began a new chant, louder and more forceful than before. The sound filled the ward, reverberating off the walls. The doctor stepped back, her eyes shining with tears. Carvex's daughter moved forward and placed something small and warm in Ethan's free hand. He looked down to see a crystal pendant on a silver chain, glowing softly with inner light. "This is the Star of Valor," Carvex explained. "There are only 17 in existence, awarded throughout our entire history to those who have demonstrated incomparable bravery. My daughter wishes you to have hers. It was given to her at birth, marking her as royalty. She insists that you have earned it far more than she, and I cannot disagree." Ethan looked at the crystal, then at the child's earnest face, then at the father's expression of profound gratitude. He wanted to protest, to say again that he was nobody special, just a mechanic who had done what anyone would do. But the words stuck in his throat. These people, this entire culture, saw his actions through a lens he could not fully understand. To them, what he had done was not just heroism, but a kind of sacred act that transcended normal understanding. He closed his fingers around the crystal and managed a weak nod. The child's face lit up with joy, and she spoke rapidly in her own language. Carvex smiled, the first time Ethan had seen a Vexorian smile, and it softened the severe lines of his face. "She says you are now her brother, bonded by fire and sacrifice. She says that when she grows up, she will tell everyone about the brave human who gave his life so she could keep hers. She says you are proof that humans and Vexorians can be more than allies. We can be family. Family." The words settled into Ethan's chest with surprising weight. He thought about his own family, his sister and her kids waiting for him back on Earth. He had volunteered for this assignment thinking only of the money, of being able to provide for them better. He had never imagined becoming part of something larger, something that might actually change the course of history. The doctor moved forward again, gently indicating that Carvex and his daughter needed to let their patient rest. The Supreme Commander nodded in understanding and carefully released Ethan's hand. But before leaving, he leaned close and spoke quietly, just for Ethan to hear. "You should know," he said, "that what you did has caused significant changes in our military and our government. The extremist factions that engineered the sabotage have been completely disbanded. More than that, the hardline leaders who preached eternal war with humanity have been forced to resign. How could they maintain their positions when a human proved capable of greater honor than any of them? You did more with one selfless act than 1,000 diplomats could have accomplished in 100 years of negotiations." He straightened and placed his hand over his chest in what Ethan recognized as a Vexorian salute. "Rest and heal, Ethan Cole. When you are well, you will find that the galaxy is a very different place than it was before you walked into that burning corridor." Carvex and his daughter departed, the assembled soldiers falling into formation behind them. As they filed out of the medical ward, each soldier paused at Ethan's bedside and performed that same hand-over-chest salute. It took nearly 20 minutes for them all to pass, a seemingly endless river of warriors paying homage to a simple mechanic from Earth. When the last soldier finally left and quiet descended on the ward again, Ethan felt exhaustion pulling at him. The doctor checked his monitors and adjusted something on his foreline. "Sleep now," she said gently. "You have extensive healing ahead of you. Second and third degree burns over 30% of your body, 3 cracked ribs, a fractured collarbone, and a severe concussion. You are lucky to be alive, though I suspect you do not feel particularly lucky at the moment." "Actually," Ethan said quietly, "I do. I feel incredibly lucky. I got to save someone. That little girl gets to grow up because I was in the right place at the right time. That is worth any amount of pain." The doctor smiled and patted his shoulder gently. "Get some rest, hero. The galaxy is going to want to meet you when you wake up." As Ethan drifted toward sleep, his fingers still wrapped around the glowing crystal pendant, he thought about what Carvex had said. The galaxy was a different place now. Peace where there had been Cold War. Understanding where there had been suspicion. And all because he had done the only thing his conscience would allow when faced with a scared child and approaching death. His last thought before sleep claimed him was wondering if his sister had heard what happened yet, and what she would say when he told her he had accidentally become a hero. The next time Ethan woke, it was to find his room filled with flowers. Not Earth flowers, but the Vexorian equivalent, crystalline structures that chimed softly when air moved past them, creating a gentle musical sound. They covered every available surface, hanging from the ceiling in delicate nets, standing in tall vases on the floor, creating a forest of glass and light that transformed the medical ward into something magical. A nurse, human this time, noticed him stirring and came over with a smile. "Mr. Cole, you are awake. Good. You have visitors waiting, quite a lot of visitors actually. The waiting room has been full for 2 days. Everyone wants to meet the man who ended the war." "I did not end anything," Ethan protested, his voice stronger now though still rough. "I just tried to save a kid." The nurse's smile turned knowing. "Well, the galaxy disagrees with your assessment. You are the most famous human alive right now. Both Earth and Vexoria have declared you a hero. There are calls for statues, holidays in your name, the works. The diplomatic corps wants to give you a medal. The Vexorian High Command wants to adopt you into their nobility. And about 6,000 news agencies want interviews." Ethan groaned and closed his eyes. "That sounds exhausting." The nurse laughed. "Well, you do not have to deal with any of it until you are healed. Doctor's orders. But there are a few people who have been waiting very patiently and whom I think you might actually want to see." She moved to the door and made a gesture. A moment later, a woman rushed in, her face streaked with tears. Ethan recognized her instantly and felt his own eyes burning. "Sarah," he said, and his voice broke on her name. His sister crossed the room in seconds and very carefully wrapped her arms around him, mindful of his injuries. She was sobbing openly now, her whole body shaking. "You idiot," she said into his shoulder. "You beautiful, brave, stupid idiot. When they told me what happened, when they said you were dying, I thought I lost you. I thought my kids were going to grow up without their uncle. I thought I would never see you again." "I am okay," Ethan said, hugging her back as tightly as he dared. "I am alive. I am going to be fine." Sarah pulled back and looked at him, her eyes red but fierce. "They showed me the footage," she said, "from the ship's security cameras. They showed me what you did, standing between that child and the explosion. Ethan, that was the bravest and most terrifying thing I have ever seen. I do not know whether to hug you or hit you for taking such a risk." "I am sorry," Ethan said. "I did not mean to scare you. I just could not leave her. You understand, right? If it had been one of your kids, you would have done the same thing." Sarah's expression softened, and she nodded slowly. "Yes," she said quietly. "Yes, I would have. And that is why I am not angry, just terrified and grateful, and so incredibly proud of you I cannot stand it." Behind her, 2 small faces peeked around the doorframe. Ethan's nephews, 8-year-old Marcus and 6-year-old Tyler, stared at him with wide eyes. Sarah beckoned them forward, and they approached cautiously, as if afraid he might break. "Uncle E," Marcus said in a small voice. "Are you okay? Mom said you were really hurt." "I am getting better," Ethan assured him. "The doctors here are really good. I will be up and around in no time." Tyler, the younger boy, was staring at the crystal pendant still hanging around Ethan's neck. "Is that magic?" he asked with the absolute seriousness only a 6-year-old could muster. "Kind of," Ethan said with a smile. "It was a gift from the little girl I helped. She is a princess, actually. A real alien princess." Both boys' eyes went even wider. "You saved a princess," Marcus breathed. "Uncle E, you are like a real superhero." "I am not a superhero," Ethan protested. "I am just your uncle who fixes air conditioners and sometimes does the right thing." Sarah squeezed his hand. "To them, you are a superhero. To a lot of people, you are. You are going to have to get used to that." They visited for another hour, filling Ethan in on everything that had happened in the 3 days he had been unconscious. The news coverage had been relentless, with every major outlet on both Earth and Vexoria running the story. The video footage from the ship's security cameras had gone viral, showing Ethan's final moments before the explosion with heartbreaking clarity. Both governments had fast-tracked the peace treaty in the wake of public outcry, with citizens on both sides demanding an end to hostilities after witnessing such a powerful demonstration of cross-species compassion. When visiting hours ended and Sarah had to take the boys back to their temporary quarters on the station, Ethan was left alone with his thoughts. The crystal pendant on his chest pulsed with soft light in time with his heartbeat, a constant reminder of what he had done and who he had saved. He thought about Carvex's daughter, about those golden eyes filled with terror transforming to confusion, and then wonder as she realized what he was trying to do. He thought about that moment when the blast hit, the certainty that he was going to die, and the strange peace that had come with knowing it was for something worthwhile. He had never thought of himself as particularly courageous. Growing up, he had been the quiet kid who avoided confrontation, who preferred fixing things to fighting over them. In school, he had been neither the strongest nor the smartest, just average in most ways. His teachers had described him as dependable, steady, the kind of person you could count on, but who would never set the world on fire. He had been fine with that assessment. He had never wanted to be special or remarkable. He just wanted to live a decent life, help people when he could, and maybe leave the world a little better than he found it. Now, somehow, he had become a symbol, a bridge between two species that had been on the brink of war. The man who proved that humans could act with honor even in the face of death. It was overwhelming and more than a little terrifying. Over the next week, as Ethan's body slowly healed, the truth of Sarah's words became increasingly apparent. The galaxy wanted to meet him, wanted to thank him, wanted to honor him in every way imaginable. The Vexorian High Command sent a delegation that included 3 council members, each of whom spent hours telling him about the impact his actions had on their society. The hardline military faction that had dominated Vexorian politics for decades had collapsed almost overnight. Young Vexorians were enrolling in cultural exchange programs with Earth in record numbers, eager to learn about the species that could produce someone like Ethan Cole. The human government was equally enthusiastic, though Ethan found their attention somewhat more uncomfortable. Politicians who had built careers on hawkish anti-Vexorian rhetoric suddenly wanted photos with him, wanted to claim they had always supported peace, wanted to associate themselves with his heroism. The Secretary General of the United Earth Council called him personally to offer congratulations and to extend an invitation to address the full assembly once he recovered. News agencies offered staggering sums for exclusive interviews. Book publishers wanted to buy his life story. Entertainment companies wanted to make movies about him. Through it all, Ethan remained stubbornly himself. He gave a few interviews, mostly to outlets he trusted to get the story right, but he refused the massive payment offers. He agreed to accept the official honors from both governments, but insisted the ceremonies be small and dignified rather than the massive spectacles the planners initially envisioned. When offered a position as a special ambassador between Earth and Vexoria, complete with a salary that would have made him wealthy beyond his dreams, he turned it down. "I am a mechanic," he told the disappointed diplomatic corps representative. "That is what I am good at. That is what I love doing. I do not want to be a professional hero or a walking symbol. I want to fix things and help people and live my life." But the galaxy was not quite ready to let him return to anonymity. 3 weeks after the explosion, when Ethan was finally cleared for limited activity, Carvex returned with his daughter and an invitation. "The Vexorian homeworld wishes to honor you," the Supreme Commander explained. "There will be a ceremony inducting you into the Hall of Eternal Heroes. Your name will be carved in the living stone of our most sacred place, alongside the greatest warriors and leaders in our history. My daughter insists on being the one to escort you. She has been asking about you every day, wanting to know when you would be well enough to visit." The child, whose name Ethan had learned was Thesha, stood beside her father with barely contained excitement. She had been taking intensive English lessons and could now communicate in simple sentences, though her accent made some words difficult to understand. "Please come," she said earnestly. "I want to show you my home. I want everyone to meet my brother." Ethan looked at her bright golden eyes and found he could not refuse. Despite everything he had said about not wanting to be a symbol, he could not deny this child who he had saved. If she wanted to show him off to her people, wanted the galaxy to see him honored in the way her culture deemed appropriate, then he would endure it for her sake. The trip to Vexoria took 2 days aboard a high-speed diplomatic vessel. Ethan spent most of the journey in his quarters, still recovering from his injuries and trying to mentally prepare for what awaited him. Sarah had wanted to come along, but he had convinced her to stay on the station with the boys. This was something he needed to face alone. Thesha visited him frequently during the journey, bringing him strange Vexorian foods to try and chattering away in her improving English about what he would see when they arrived. She had apparently appointed herself as his guide and protector, a role reversal that Ethan found both touching and amusing. She told him about her school, her friends, her favorite activities. She was learning to paint, she said, and wanted to make a picture of him to hang in her room. She had already made several attempts, but could not quite capture his face the way she remembered it from that moment in the corridor. When Ethan asked her what she remembered from that day, Thesha grew quiet and thoughtful. Her young face took on a gravity beyond her years. I remember being so scared, she said slowly. I thought the fire was going to eat me. I thought I was going to die alone in the dark. Then you came. At first, I was more scared because you were human and Father always told me humans were dangerous. But then you knelt down and spread your arms and I understood. You were going to protect me. You were going to be my shield. She reached out and touched the pendant around Ethan's neck. I knew what was going to happen. I knew the bright thing on the wall was going to explode. I tried to tell you to run, but you do not speak our language. You just smiled at me and stayed. When the explosion came, it was so loud and bright. I closed my eyes and felt the heat, but it did not touch me. You took it all. Her golden eyes filled with tears. When the soldiers came and pulled the metal away, I saw you lying there. Your back was all burned and you were not moving. I thought you were dead. I thought you died saving me. I cried and cried. I told the soldiers to save you, that you were a hero. They took us both away and I did not see you again until you woke up in the medical place. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Father says I am alive because of you. He says I get to grow up and go to school and maybe have my own children someday because you chose to die for me. He says that is the most precious gift anyone has ever given our family. He says I have to remember it always and honor it by living a good life. Ethan found his own eyes burning. He pulled Thesha into a gentle hug. You do not have to do anything special, he said softly. Just be happy. Just live your life and be kind to others. That is enough. That is more than enough. When the ship finally entered orbit around Vexoria, Ethan pressed his face to the observation window like a child. The planet was beautiful, its surface a swirling mixture of deep purples and blues with vast oceans that sparkled like jewels. Cities glittered across the continents, their architecture vertical and elegant, reaching toward the sky in graceful spirals. It was alien and strange and magnificent. The ceremony was scheduled for the following day, giving Ethan time to rest and acclimate. Carvex had arranged for him to stay in the palace, an enormous structure that grew organically from the living rock of a mountain. The guest quarters they provided were larger than Ethan's entire apartment back on Earth, with windows that looked out over a city of millions. That night, unable to sleep due to nervousness and the unfamiliarity of his surroundings, Ethan stood at the window and watched the city lights. He thought about how he had gotten here, the strange chain of events that had led a simple mechanic from Earth to a palace on an alien world. If someone had told him 3 months ago that he would end a war and become a hero to 2 species, he would have thought them insane. A gentle knock on his door pulled him from his reverie. When he opened it, he found Thesha standing there in sleep clothes, her father behind her looking apologetic. She could not sleep, Carvex explained. She insisted on checking that you were comfortable and had everything you needed. She worries about you. I am fine, Ethan assured them both. Just a little nervous about tomorrow. Thesha looked up at him with concern. Will there be many people? She asked. Carvex answered before Ethan could. The ceremony will be broadcast across the entire planet. Approximately 4 billion Vexorians will be watching. There will be representatives from every major world in the region. It will be, he said with a slight smile, quite large. Ethan felt his stomach drop. 4 billion. He had known the ceremony would be significant, but somehow the actual number made it real in a way it had not been before. Thesha must have seen the fear on his face because she reached out and took his hand. Do not be scared, she said earnestly. I will be with you. I will not let anything bad happen to you. It is my turn to protect you now. The simple sincerity of her words, the role reversal of this child promising to keep him safe, made Ethan smile despite his nerves. Thank you, he said. That makes me feel better. Satisfied that he was well, Thesha allowed her father to lead her back to bed. But she paused at the door and looked back. Uncle Ethan, she said, using the title she had adopted for him. Thank you for not running away. Thank you for staying with me. Ethan nodded, not trusting his voice. After they left, he returned to the window and stood there for a long time, watching the alien city and thinking about choices and consequences and the strange ways that courage could change the world. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Servants arrived early to help Ethan dress in the formal attire that had been prepared for him, a combination of human and Vexorian styles that somehow managed to look both elegant and comfortable. The crystal pendant hung prominently on his chest, catching the light and casting rainbow patterns across the walls. When it was time, Carvex and Thesha came to escort him. The Supreme Commander wore his full ceremonial armor, every plate polished to a mirror shine. Thesha wore a formal gown in white and gold, her scales groomed until they shimmered with iridescent beauty. She took Ethan's hand without hesitation and smiled up at him. "Ready?" she asked. "As I will ever be," Ethan replied. They walked through the palace, down corridors carved from living stone and decorated with tapestries showing Vexorian history. Guards snapped to attention as they passed, saluting with their hands over their chests. Servants bowed low. Everyone they encountered looked at Ethan with expressions of profound respect. The Hall of Eternal Heroes was located in the heart of the palace, a massive chamber with a vaulted ceiling that stretched hundreds of feet above. The walls were carved from a single piece of stone that seemed to glow from within, and across those walls were inscribed thousands of names in flowing Vexorian script. Each name represented a hero, a warrior, a leader who had done something extraordinary in service to their people. The hall was packed with Vexorians, representatives from hundreds of worlds and factions. They stood in respectful silence as Ethan entered, parting to create a path straight to the center of the chamber. At the far end, on a raised platform, stood the entire High Command, 7 of the most powerful individuals in the Vexorian Empire. They wore robes of office in deep purple trimmed with silver, and their scales had been marked with ceremonial paint and patterns that denoted their rank and achievements. Ethan walked forward, Thesha's hand still firmly gripping his, Carvex on his other side. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft sound of their footsteps. When they reached the platform, Carvex guided him to stand in the center, while Thesha took her place with the other members of the royal family. The eldest member of the High Command stepped forward. His scales were faded with age, his eyes holding the weight of decades of leadership. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the vast chamber, amplified by the acoustics of the carved stone. "We gather today to honor one who is not of our people, who owes us no loyalty, who had no obligation to our children or our future. We gather to honor Ethan Cole, a human who demonstrated courage beyond measure and compassion beyond calculation. In the darkest moment, when death approached and escape was possible, he chose sacrifice. He chose to shield our child with his own body. He chose to die so that she might live." The elder turned to face Ethan directly. "Ethan Cole, by your actions you have shown us that honor knows no species. You have taught us that courage can be found in the most unexpected places. You have proven that the bonds between intelligent beings can transcend history, politics, and even self-preservation. You gave us the most precious gift any being can give. You gave us the life of our child, purchased with what you believed was your own." He lifted a long crystalline blade, its surface etched with flowing script. "This is the Blade of Names, used for over 3,000 years to inscribe the heroes of our people into eternal memory. Today, for the first time in our history, we will use it to inscribe the name of one not born of Vexoria." The elder approached the wall behind the platform, where a section of stone remained unmarked, reserved for new heroes. He pressed the blade against the glowing surface and began to carve. The script flowed from the blade in lines of light, burning themselves permanently into the stone. Ethan could not read the Vexorian letters, but he watched as his name took shape in an alien language, becoming part of a legacy that stretched back millennia. When it was done, the elder turned back to Ethan and spoke words in the Vexorian language, formal and rhythmic. Then he translated into English. "By the ancient customs of our people and the authority vested in this council, we declare Ethan Cole to be guardian of the light, protector of the innocent, shield of the future. His name is now bound to ours. His legacy is now part of our history. His courage is now our example." The entire assembly dropped to one knee in perfect unison. For billion watching across the planet, millions more across allied worlds, all bearing witness to this moment. The elder remained standing and placed his hand over his chest in salute. Ethan Cole, we thank you. Our children thank you. Our future thanks you. You have given us something we desperately needed. You have given us hope that our species and yours can build something better together. You have shown us that the measure of a person is not found in their species or their strength, but in what they choose to do when faced with impossible circumstances. He gestured to the wall, to the glowing script of Ethan's name among the heroes. This will remain as long as our civilization endures. Thousands of years from now, when the stars themselves have shifted in their courses, your name will still be here. Children will learn your story. They will learn that a human mechanic, armed with nothing but his own body and his courage, saved a Vexorian child, and, in doing so, saved us all from a war that would have destroyed both our peoples. The elder extended his hand, and Ethan took it, sealing the moment. Then the assembled thousands rose as one and began to chant, a thunderous sound that rolled through the hall like the crashing of waves. It was the same chant the soldiers had performed in the medical ward, but multiplied 1,000-fold. The sound shook the very foundations of the building, and Ethan felt it resonating in his chest, in his bones, in the crystal pendant that pulsed with light against his heart. When the chant finally faded, the formal ceremony concluded, and the gathering dissolved into something more personal. Vexorians approached in a steady stream, each wanting to meet him, to thank him, to touch his hand, or simply stand near him. Many had tears in their golden eyes. Some brought their own children, lifting them up to see the human hero. Parents told Ethan that they would tell their offspring about him, that his story would be passed down through their families as a lesson in true courage. Thesha stayed close throughout it all, proudly introducing her uncle to anyone who approached. She had appointed herself as his guardian for the day, taking her self-assigned role very seriously. When she saw him beginning to tire from the constant attention, she politely but firmly informed people that he needed rest, clearing space around him with the imperious authority only a child could muster. As the day wore on and the crowds finally began to thin, Carvex approached with several members of the High Command. Ethan Cole, the Supreme Commander, said formally, "We have been discussing matters of great importance. The peace treaty between our peoples is now signed and ratified, but much work remains to build true understanding and cooperation. We would like to propose the creation of a new institution, a joint cultural exchange academy, where young humans and Vexorians can learn together, can build friendships, can create the foundation for a lasting alliance." One of the council members stepped forward. "We would like to name this academy after you," she said. "The Ethan Cole Institute for Interspecies Understanding. It would be a living monument to what you represent, a place where your example of cross-species compassion could inspire generations to come." Ethan felt overwhelmed by the proposal. An entire institute named after him, teaching thousands of students. It was far beyond anything he had imagined. But looking at Thesha standing beside him, at her hopeful golden eyes, he realized he could not refuse. If his name could help bring the two species together, if it could prevent future conflicts and save future lives, then he had to accept regardless of his personal discomfort with the attention. "I would be honored," he said quietly, "but only if you promise to focus on the lesson and not the person. I do not want students learning to worship a hero. I want them learning to act with courage when it matters, to value life across all species, to choose compassion over fear. Can you promise me that?" Carvex nodded solemnly. "You have our word. The Institute will teach your actions, not your legend. It will encourage students to find their own courage, not to simply admire yours." "Then yes," Ethan said. "I accept." The council members looked pleased, and one immediately began discussing plans and timelines. But Carvex held up a hand. "There will be time for details later. Today is for celebration. Tonight, there will be a feast in Ethan Cole's honor. The entire palace is preparing, and representatives from Earth have arrived to join us. It will be a proper merging of our cultures, the first of many such occasions, we hope." The feast that night was indeed spectacular. Long tables filled the palace's grand hall, laden with dishes from both Earth and Vexoria. Humans and Vexorians mingled freely, the initial awkwardness giving way to genuine curiosity and warmth. Music played, a blending of human and Vexorian instruments that created something entirely new and beautiful. Ethan found himself seated at the head table, between Carvex and the human Secretary General who had traveled all the way from Earth for the ceremony. Thesha sat on his other side, having refused to be separated from her uncle even for the formal dinner. She ate with careful dignity, wanting to show the adults that she belonged at the important table. During the meal, the Secretary General leaned close to Ethan and spoke quietly. "Mr. Cole, I want you to know that what you have done extends far beyond saving one child or even ending the Cold War with Vexoria. You have given humanity something we desperately needed. You have given us a story that reminds us of our own capacity for good. In an age where we sometimes struggle to see hope, you have become a beacon." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I know you do not want to be a symbol or a legend. I understand your desire to return to your normal life. But I hope you will understand that you have become something larger whether you wanted to or not. Children on Earth are already playing games where they pretend to be Ethan Cole, the brave mechanic who saved the alien princess. Schools are teaching your story in their ethics classes. You have inspired millions to be better, to act with more courage and compassion. I am still just a mechanic," Ethan said softly. "I still prefer working with my hands to making speeches. I still get nervous in crowds. Saving Thesha does not change who I fundamentally am." The Secretary General smiled. "No, but it revealed who you fundamentally are. That is the difference. You did not become brave that day. You simply showed the courage you always possessed when circumstances demanded it." Across the table, Carvex raised his glass and called for attention. The conversations gradually faded as everyone turned to listen to the Supreme Commander. "A toast," Carvex announced, "to Ethan Cole, who proved that the highest virtues are not the exclusive domain of any one species. To the man who valued the life of a child he did not know over his own survival. To the hero who ended a war not with weapons, but with an act of pure selfless love." The entire hall rose and lifted their glasses. Humans and Vexorians together, their voices joined as they repeated the toast and drank deeply. Ethan felt his face burning with embarrassment, but managed to smile and nod his thanks. Beside him, Thesha tugged on his sleeve. When he leaned down, she whispered in his ear, "You are a very important person now, Uncle Ethan, but you are still my uncle first. Promise you will not forget me when you go back to Earth." Ethan pulled her into a gentle hug. "I could never forget you," he whispered back. "You are stuck with me forever. That is what family means." The little girl beamed and settled back into her chair, satisfied. The celebration continued late into the night. Musicians played, dancers performed traditional routines from both cultures, and speeches were made by dignitaries praising the new era of cooperation. Through it all, Ethan felt a strange duality. Part of him was overwhelmed and uncomfortable with the attention, wanting nothing more than to escape to somewhere quiet. But another part, a part he had not known existed before that day in the burning corridor, felt a quiet satisfaction. He had done something that mattered. He had made a choice that saved a life and changed the course of history. Whether he wanted the attention or not, he could not regret the action that had caused it. In the weeks that followed, as Ethan slowly returned to something resembling normal life, the full scope of what had changed became clear. The Joint Cultural Exchange Academy was fast-tracked through both governments, with construction beginning on campuses on both Earth and Vexoria. Applications flooded in from young people eager to be part of the first generation to study across species lines. The program was oversubscribed by a factor of 50, forcing the creation of additional facilities to handle the demand. Ethan attended the groundbreaking ceremony for the Earth campus, held in Geneva where the peace treaty had been signed. Sarah and his nephews came with him, and he gave a short speech about the importance of understanding over fear, of compassion over conflict. It was broadcast across human space and received millions of positive responses. Despite his discomfort with public speaking, Ethan found himself doing more of it, accepting select invitations to talk about his experience and what it had taught him about courage and choice. He also maintained regular contact with Thesha and Carvex. The little girl called him every week through the interstellar communication network, chattering about her school and her friends and the painting she was still working on. She had become something of a celebrity herself, the child whose rescue had sparked the peace. But Carvex and his family worked hard to give her as normal a childhood as possible, shielding her from the worst of the attention while still allowing her to speak about her experience when she wanted to. 6 months after the explosion, Ethan was invited back to Vexoria for the official opening of the Academy's main campus. He brought Sarah and the boys this time, wanting them to see what their uncle's actions had created. They toured the facilities together, walking through classrooms where human and Vexorian students would soon learn side by side, through laboratories equipped with the best technology from both species, through dormitories designed to accommodate the different needs of multiple species while fostering interaction and friendship. In the center of the campus stood a statue. It depicted a human figure kneeling with arms spread wide, and behind those protective arms, a small Vexorian child. The sculpture was carved from the same glowing stone as the Hall of Eternal Heroes, and at its base was a plaque in both English and Vexorian script. Ethan read the English version with tears in his eyes. Here stood a mechanic who became a hero, not through strength of arms, but through strength of heart. Here stood a human who valued one alien life above his own. Here stood a man who taught two species that courage knows no borders and compassion requires no common language. Let all who pass remember that the greatest acts of heroism often come from the most unexpected sources, and that anyone, in the right moment, can choose to be extraordinary. Marcus and Tyler stood on either side of the statue, looking up at it with awe. "That is really you, Uncle E," Marcus said quietly. "You are in a statue." "It is not really me," Ethan said. "It is an idea. It is a reminder to everyone who sees it that they have the capacity to do the right thing when it matters most." Tyler reached out and touched the stone. "When I grow up," he said, "I want to be brave like you." Ethan knelt down to his nephew's level. "You do not have to wait until you grow up to be brave. You can be brave right now, in small ways every day. Standing up for someone being bullied. Telling the truth when it is hard. Being kind when others are not. Those are all forms of courage. The big dramatic moment like what happened to me, that is rare. But the everyday courage to just be a good person, that is something everyone can practice." At the opening ceremony that afternoon, Ethan stood with Carvex and several human dignitaries to officially dedicate the campus. Thousands attended in person, with millions more watching across both human and Vexorian space. When it came time for Ethan to speak, he kept his remarks brief. "I am not an educator or a diplomat or a warrior," he said. "I am a mechanic who made a choice. But what I have learned in the months since that day is that we all make choices every single day about what kind of people we want to be and what kind of galaxy we want to live in. This academy exists to help young people make those choices with wisdom and compassion. It exists to prove that our differences can be sources of strength rather than sources of conflict." He gestured to the statue behind him. That moment, frozen in stone, it lasted only seconds. But what it represents, the willingness to protect the innocent at cost to ourselves, that is eternal. That is what binds civilized beings together regardless of what species we belong to. I hope every student who walks through these doors will remember that their choices matter. That in the right moment, any one of them could be the person who makes a difference. That heroism is not about being fearless, but about acting in spite of fear, because something matters more than your safety. Ethan paused and looked out at the sea of faces, human and Vexorian mixed together. "I also hope you will remember that we are all someone's child. Thesha is Carvex's daughter. She is precious to her family, just as your children are precious to you. When I saw her in that corridor, I did not see an alien or a Vexorian or the daughter of a supreme commander. I saw a scared kid who needed help. That is what I hope this academy will teach. To see each other not as aliens or strangers or potential enemies, but as people, as beings with families and dreams, and the same fundamental desire to live and be safe, and maybe make the galaxy a little better." He stepped back from the podium to thunderous applause. Thesha rushed forward and hugged him tightly, and the cameras captured that moment, the alien child and the human hero embracing, a perfect symbol of what was possible when fear was set aside in favor of compassion. In the years that followed, Ethan Cole did eventually return to being a mechanic. He went back to Earth, back to fixing air conditioning systems and repairing hull seals. But he also served on the board of the academy that bore his name, helping to guide its development and ensure it stayed true to its mission. He gave occasional speeches when asked, always emphasizing that heroism was a choice available to everyone rather than a special quality possessed by a few. He watched with pride as the first classes graduated from the Ethan Cole Institute, young humans and Vexorians who had forged friendships across species lines. Many of them went on to become diplomats, scientists, artists, and teachers who spread the message of cooperation further. The peace between humanity and Vexoria deepened and expanded, with trade agreements and scientific collaborations and cultural exchanges becoming routine. Thesha grew into a remarkable young woman, brilliant and compassionate, determined to honor her uncle's sacrifice by dedicating her life to building bridges between species. She became a prominent advocate for interspecies cooperation, traveling to dozens of worlds to speak about her experience and the human who had saved her. She finished her painting of Ethan, the one she had worked on for years, capturing not just his face but the moment of choice, the instant when he decided that her life mattered more than his own. It hung in the Academy's main hall, a reminder to every student of what they were there to learn. On the 15th anniversary of the incident, a joint ceremony was held on the site where the destroyed diplomatic vessel had been. A memorial floated in space, a ring of crystalline panels that caught and reflected the light of nearby stars. Inscribed on those panels were the names of everyone who had died in the sabotage, along with the names of the rescue workers who had saved so many lives that day. Both human and Vexorian representatives attended, and Ethan was invited to dedicate the memorial. He stood on the observation deck of the ceremony ship, looking out at the slowly rotating ring of names. Sarah stood beside him, gray now threading through her hair. Marcus and Tyler were there too, both young men now, Marcus about to enter the diplomatic service and Tyler planning to attend the academy named after his uncle. This memorial honors those who died and those who saved others, Ethan said when it came time to speak. But I wanted to also honor a different kind of courage. The courage of both our species to choose peace over war after generations of conflict. The courage to trust when trust seemed impossible. The courage to look at someone fundamentally different and see not a threat, but a potential friend. He thought back to that day 15 years ago, to the burning corridor and the scared child, and the impossible choice that had seemed so simple in the moment. My act in saving Thesha has been called heroic, he continued. But the real heroism is what came after. The people on both sides who chose to believe that peace was possible. The young people who enrolled in the academy despite the fears of their elders. The families who opened their homes to exchange students from another species. The billions of individuals who made the daily choice to reject hatred and embrace cooperation. That is the real story, not one man's moment of sacrifice, but an entire civilization's sustained commitment to being better. As the memorial was officially dedicated and the names lit up with soft internal light, Ethan felt a hand slip into his. He looked down to see Thesha, now a woman, but still unmistakably the child he had saved. She smiled up at him with those golden eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for saving me that day, though I will be grateful for that until the stars burn out. But thank you for showing us all what was possible. Thank you for believing we were worth saving." Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "You were always worth saving. All of you, every single Vexorian and human, you were always worth the effort of trying to build something better. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time to make that obvious." They stood together, human and Vexorian, uncle and niece bound not by blood but by choice and sacrifice, and watched the memorial spin slowly in the starlight. Around them, representatives from a dozen species gathered to honor the dead and celebrate the peace that had grown from tragedy. Later that night, as Ethan prepared to return to Earth, Carvex sought him out for a private conversation. The Supreme Commander was older now, his scales fading slightly with age, but his eyes were as sharp and intelligent as ever. "Ethan Cole," he said, "I wanted to speak with you before you departed. 15 years ago, you gave me the greatest gift any father could receive. You gave me my daughter's future. But what I have come to understand in the years since is that you gave all of us something equally precious. You gave us an example to aspire to. You showed us that the highest form of courage is not the willingness to kill for what you believe in, but the willingness to die protecting what you love. He placed his hand over his chest in the Vexorian salute. I have been a warrior my entire life. I have commanded armies and won battles. I have been praised for my strategic brilliance and my tactical skill. But I will be remembered, if I am remembered at all, as the father of the child that Ethan Cole saved. And I consider that the highest honor I could possibly receive, because it means I am connected to you, to your legacy, to the example you set. Thank you, my friend. Thank you for showing us all what we could be. The two clasped hands, human and Vexorian, warrior and mechanic, bound together by the moment that had changed everything. As Ethan's ship pulled away from the memorial station and began the journey back to Earth, he stood at the observation window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, young people from a dozen species were learning together at the academy that bore his name. Somewhere, humans and Vexorians were working side by side on projects that would have been unthinkable a generation ago. Somewhere, a little girl he had saved was now a woman working to make the galaxy better for everyone. He had never wanted to be a hero. He had just wanted to fix things and help people and live a decent life. In the end, he supposed he had done exactly that. He had fixed something that was broken, the relationship between two species. He had helped people, billions of them, by showing that cooperation was possible. And he had lived a decent life, one marked by a single moment of extraordinary courage but defined by years of quiet dedication to making that moment matter. The crystal pendant still hung around his neck, glowing softly with internal light. He touched it gently and thought of Thesha, of her father, of all the people whose lives had been changed by a split-second choice in a burning corridor. He thought about how close he had come to not volunteering for that diplomatic mission, how easily he could have stayed home and someone else would have been the mechanic on that ship, how history could have unfolded so differently if he had been just a little more risk-averse, a little less concerned about the extra pay. But he had gone, and he had been there, and when the moment came, he had made the choice that seemed right even though it cost him everything he thought he would have. And somehow, miraculously, he had survived to see the world that choice created. A world where former enemies worked together, where children learned to see past the differences of species, where courage and compassion were valued above strength and dominance. It was, Ethan reflected as Earth grew larger in the observation window, a pretty good outcome for a mechanic who just wanted to help people. Not perfect, not utopian, but better, significantly better. And perhaps that was all anyone could really hope for. Not to fix everything, not to solve every problem, but to make things a little better than they found them. The ship entered Earth's atmosphere, and Ethan prepared to go home. To his sister and his nephews, to his small apartment and his workshop full of tools, to the comfortable routine of a life spent fixing things. But he carried with him the knowledge that he had already fixed the most important thing of all. He had helped heal the rift between species, had proven that the best of humanity and the best of the Vexorians could meet in the middle and create something beautiful. And it had all started with a terrified child, a burning corridor, and a simple choice to stand between her and the explosion. To choose her life over his own. To demonstrate, in the most visceral way possible, that some things were worth dying for. And that sometimes, if you were very lucky, those things were worth living for too. Ethan Cole returned to Earth a hero, but he lived as a mechanic. And in that balance between recognition and normalcy, between legacy and daily life, he found contentment. He had done what he could when it mattered most. He had made the right choice at the crucial moment. And in the end, was that not all anyone could do? Make the right choices when they presented themselves and hope that those choices rippled outward to create something better? The ship landed gently at the spaceport, and Ethan gathered his belongings. As he walked down the ramp into the bright sunlight of Earth, he saw Sarah and the boys waiting for him, along with a small crowd of reporters and well-wishers. He sighed but smiled. This was his life now, the unexpected consequence of doing what was right. He could handle it. He had faced far worse in that burning corridor 15 years ago. And as he embraced his sister and ruffled his nephew's hair and faced the cameras with patient dignity, he knew that he would do it all again without hesitation. Would stand between that child and that explosion 1,000 times over. Because that was what it meant to be human at their best, to choose compassion over self-preservation, to value life beyond the boundaries of species or culture or personal connection. Ethan Cole had become a bridge between worlds without intending to. He had ended a war without firing a shot. He had proven that heroism could be found in the most unexpected places and the most unlikely people. And all it had taken was one moment of pure, selfless courage. One choice to stand rather than run. One decision that a scared child's life mattered more than his own. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.